Number 1. This happened while I was in college, 5 years ago. I was a transfer student and was 21 at the time. I was set up to be living in a building that was for students 21 or older, and moved in a week and a half before classes began. This school was in northern Michigan, so when I first arrived, campus was dead. I mostly kept to myself, but was friendly with the people in my building, namely one guy named Khalil, an exchange student from Lebanon. He seemed nice enough, though there was a distinct language barrier, so things were easily lost in translation. Our RA and RD, resident director and resident assistant, made everyone who moved in have a meeting to go over basic rules and whatnot. At the end of the meeting, as I'm leaving the rec room, Khalil suddenly puts his arm up on the wall in front of me, almost clotheslining me. Caught off guard, I'm peeved and creeped at this aggressive move. He begins explaining that he would like to be my friend, and would like to go out for dinner to get to know me. He worded it oddly, so I wasn't sure if it was a date or just a friendly invitation, but I attributed it to his bad English. Like an imbecile, I felt concerned physically and socially. I'm awful with confrontation, and can be too nice, so I agreed. He meant right then and there, however, and he says, "I'll get us a taxi and we go now." My introverted side was upset that my night of drinking and unpacking in solitude was disrupted, so I wasn't excited. If only I knew that listening to my inner introvert would have saved me from an unsettling experience. 10 minutes later, we're getting into this taxi, and as I'm entering, I feel this sense of dread. And I think to myself, I barely know this guy, and Hudson's the restaurant that we're going to. It's a couple of miles away, and I'll be stranded out there with this stranger if it gets weird. As we drive, my guard raises higher and higher. He wants to know everything about me, and is throwing questions rapid fire. My age, dating history, physical preferences in men, religion, family, everything. I'm thinking, fuck, this is going to be so awkward. And I wanted the night to be over before we even get to the restaurant. At the restaurant, we both look at the menu for a bit. The waiter comes and takes my order. Salad, small and quick to eat. And then the waiter asks what Khalil wants. He says, "Oh no, I'm not hungry. I just want to watch her eat." What the fuck? Why would you ask me for dinner if you weren't hungry? And why the hell do you just want to watch me eat? I was horrified. All my family was in the lower peninsula of Michigan, 8 hours away. I have no friends up here. The only local numbers I had were of my RA and RD. I speed eat my salad as Khalil watches me, now talking about himself. He tells me about how he has an anger problem, and is looking for a woman to keep him calm, but still be a submissive traditional wife. I'm trying to hide the horror and the uneasiness as I nod and eat. He continues explaining how he was known for his temper back home, and how his brothers had stopped him from doing awful things. At this point, red flags blinding my vision. It's time to end this. I finish my food and tell him to get a taxi back to campus. I intentionally sat in the front of the taxi. I wasn't allowing the possibility of physical contact. When we got to campus, we get in the building and I say a quick thank you and haul ass back to my room. Door locked. I get into my sweats and try to chalk it up to a weird experience and vow to avoid Khalil from then on. Around 12:30 AM, I hear a knock on my door. I was watching Netflix and took out my earbuds to make sure that I was hearing right. The knocking continues. Not a courteous knock knock knock, but a closed fist pounding. I'm terrified and making as little noise as possible. I get to the door and look out of the peephole. I see Khalil. My room was at the very end of a long hallway. All rooms around me were empty at this point, with a door outside of my room leading to a parking lot surrounded by woods. Knowing how isolated I was, I slink away from the door, making zero noise, just waiting for the knocking to stop. About a minute later it stops. He growls. "I know you're in there. I will wait." My eyes widened in horror. I felt a mixture of rage and panic, but decided that confronting him right then and there wouldn't be smart. So I quietly watched Netflix until I fall asleep. I have no idea how long he waited out there. The next morning when I finally emerged from my room, I find a couple of pages taped to my door. Oh God. 3 handwritten pages from Khalil, explaining his feelings for me and his intentions of making me his wife. I went straight to my RA and explained everything that happened. She agreed to meet with Khalil herself, to explain to him how inappropriate he was being, and to tell him to leave me alone. He didn't. Notes kept coming. He came to my door dozens of times a day, and I became pretty much trapped in my room hiding from this psychopath. It lasted for 8 days, but classes began and Khalil disappeared. I was told he dropped out and moved back to Lebanon. I found it eerie how he just vanished. Had he come here solely to find a wife? I'll never know, but Khalil, I hope we never meet. Number 2. About 3 years ago, I was going to school in Philadelphia, USA, and was living with 2 other roommates. My one roommate was known to usually bring seedy characters back to the apartment. At one point during our fall semester, she befriended a guy in her advertising class who went by the name of Dallas. He became her weed dealer, and she would frequently bring him over to the apartment. I suspected they were sleeping together, but she denied it. It was a strange relationship, but who am I to judge? My other roommate and I thought that he was charismatic enough, but also didn't see the appeal that Christy, my roommate who befriended him, saw. I remember one night we had Dallas over for dinner. He told us how he played for our college's football team, that he just started his own business at the age of 25. He was a very well-known weed dealer who made a shit ton of money, and his name was Dallas because he used to live in Dallas, Texas, and his parents named him after that. Me and my other roommates nodded our heads and listened, but we didn't think much of it, except that this guy thought he was hot shit and wanted to gloat about himself. Mind you, he was about 5'4", and probably not over 150 pounds. I believe he came over for dinner a few times here and there. My roommate claimed that one time she decided to buy weed from him and went to his apartment off campus. When she arrived, she saw our roommate, Christy, just pass the fuck out on a chair in the middle of the day, in Dallas's apartment, in some random room. When my roommate arrived, he mentioned nothing of her being there. My roommate shook her awake and Christy just woke up in a haze and basically told my roommate to fuck off. My roommate recounted the story to me, and we both agreed it was fucking weird, and Dallas was probably not the safest person to hang around. After a couple of months, Christy stopped hanging with him. I remember her saying he got pissed, that she didn't want to sleep with him. I also found out that a friend of hers, who knew him for a long time, was engaged to him. Oh, also, his real name wasn't Dallas. Shocker there. Fast forward 2 years. Me nor my roommate talk to Christy anymore. We're living elsewhere in said city, doing our own thing. We get an alert on our phone that a girl who had just transferred to our college went missing after leaving from one of the campus bars the previous night. It doesn't take long, maybe a few days, when this huge story breaks. This girl was killed by someone she left the bar with that night. My roommate calls me and says, "Dude, do you remember what Dallas's real name was?" I reply, "Yeah, I believe it was Chris." She then replies, "Go online and read this article. He fucking killed that girl who just went missing." Sure enough, I go online, and there is the most horrifying mugshot of Dallas, next to a photo of the girl that he had just slain. And it gets crazier. Apparently, he had taken her home that night and attempted a one-night stand sort of deal, I assume. And I guess at one point, things turned bad, and he killed her by blunt force and strangulation. If that isn't terrible enough, he cleaned up the evidence in his apartment, threw her body in a storage container, took a lift to his grandma's house, hours away, and buried the storage container with her remains in it, on the property somewhere. After obtaining a video of the two of them leaving together from the bar, it didn't take long for the cops to bust his murdering ass. Weeks after the story broke, so many girls came forward and shared similar creepy stories about Dallas, the guy who played for said college's football and ran a successful business. You can guess that none of this was ever true. Also, he was about 28 years old, claiming that he was still a student at our college when this happened, prying on younger women. It's a truly horrifying story what happened to that young girl. I hope you rot in jail for the rest of your life, Dallas. Number 3. I was 19, staying late at the college darkroom to develop some film for my photography class. The photography building, once a tobacco warehouse, was a dark, rickety hulk near some lonely railroad tracks in a little travelled part of campus. I finished developing my film close to midnight and headed out. Nervous as always to be alone at night in this deserted part of town. It was dark, several of the streetlights around the parking lot were out, and the few that remained were phoning it in, putting out a weak flickery light that did nothing to reassure me as I headed towards my car. I heard him before I saw him, a scrape of feet on asphalt. He said,
"Hey, can you do me a favor?"
I startled and dropped my keys. He mumbled an apology for scaring me. I noticed he was wearing a jogging suit and limping. "What do you need?" I said. He hobbled a step or two towards me.
"I think I sprained my ankle. Could you take me to the ER?"
The university hospital was a short distance down the road. I hesitated. The guy looked perfectly pleasant and he did seem to be in pain, but I'd recently finished a book about serial killer Ted Bundy, who lured some of his victims by pretending to have a broken arm and asking for their help carrying books to his car. And when they leaned over to put his stuff in the passenger seat of his VW Bug, he knocked them unconscious with a crowbar and stuffed them inside. This scene played across my mind as I looked at the guy. It also occurred to me to wonder why the hell anyone would want to jog in this creepy part of town. I'm sorry, I can't do that, but I could call somebody for you. There's a phone in the photography building there."
"There's nobody to call. I just moved here. I don't really know anybody. Can't you just drive me? It's right down Limestone Avenue."
He leaned against the car and winced as he reached down to rub his ankle. "I'll call an ambulance for you," I offered.
"No, I can't afford that. I don't have health insurance. Can you just drive me? I'll pay you $20.
There was something in the way that he said this little bit. Something wrong. Like that exercise in my acting class, where we had to recite "Mary Had a Little Lamb," as though we were delivering a tragic monologue or a furious rant. There was a tone rising up that didn't quite match the words he was saying, a raw urgency that reached down inside me and hit the panic button hard. There was a moment of silence between us. "I can't help you," I said. "I'm leaving." I grabbed my keys, slipping them between my fingers the way my mum taught me, so I could use them as a weapon if he comes at me. I kept my eyes on him as I speed walked the last few feet to my car. He watched me drive away, still leaning against the car, a flat expression on his face. Away from the dark parking lot, driving through campus with my music turned up, the fear faded. I started to feel a little guilty for leaving the guy there, although I knew that I'd done what my mum and dad would have wanted me to do. I was about to turn into my dorm parking lot when I realized that I needed to pick up some stuff for breakfast the next morning. So I turned around and headed back in the direction that I'd come. About a minute down the road, my stomach clenched. There was the guy in the jogging suit, running along the sidewalk. His ankle was perfectly fine. Later that summer, 2 students at my college were attacked by those same railroad tracks. The girl survived, but her boyfriend died. The man who attacked them was a serial killer, dubbed the Railroad Killer by police. He murdered dozens of people across several states, most of them near railroad tracks. I didn't see his mugshot on TV until years later. But the picture broke me out in the same icy sweat that I felt when I saw the guy running down the street. I can't be 100% positive, but my gut tells me that I escaped a serial killer that night.
Number 4.
My second year of college was a difficult year. I wish I could say that it was due to organic chemistry or my boyfriend drama, or anything other than what actually happened. I started out my year in a great dorm. I loved all my hallmates, my room, and the fact that a dining hall was less than 100 feet away. Obviously, I spent a lot of time there, and I got to know the staff. I had worked in a restaurant for 2 years before going to school, and I could identify with the struggles that came with being a food service worker, especially because I was at a notoriously snobby school. So I sympathized with the staff having to deal with rich kids and their entitled bullshit. Most of the staff were lovely people, but one in particular seemed to take a real interest in me. He was a young white man, not much older than myself, named Matt. He always went out of his way to talk to me and ask me questions about myself and how school was going. One evening, I was doing homework in the dining hall around closing hours. Matt sat with me and we chatted for a bit. He said he was off work and heading to his car to smoke a bowl before he went home, and asked if I wanted to join. I had only smoked a few times before, but I enjoyed it, and he seemed harmless enough, so I agreed. I was still very much a sheltered child, and to me, he didn't seem like a bad guy, so he couldn't be. We lit up in his car in the parking lot behind the dining hall, and I got a glimpse of the real Matt. He ranted about how his ex-girlfriend had recently dumped him. He called her a bitch and a whore, and he told me unnecessary details about their apparently kinky sex life. The virgin in me was incredibly uncomfortable, only made worse by the paranoia brought on by the weed. He also went on about how much he hated the students at my university, especially the girls, saying they treated him as less than a human. I was completely speechless, and when I didn't respond, he tried to apologize for going off, saying that I was different and that he wanted to get to know me better. I remember blurting out that I needed to go, and I got the hell out of there. He got out too and shouted after me to come back, and I thought he might chase me, but he didn't, and I got back to my room safely. I avoided that dining hall like the plague for the next week, and I didn't see him again until the one night that still haunts me to this day. Around midnight, I was walking back to my dorm alone from a function at the Christian Center, which was only about 2 blocks away. I know walking by myself was stupid, but the buses weren't running, and I felt bad asking someone to walk with me because there were some steep inclines between the center and my dorm. I was walking along an empty residential street that was just around the corner from my dorm when I noticed a black SUV that was creeping along behind me. It was going so slow that it was hard not to notice. At first, I tried not to panic, but it quickly clicked that it was the same car as Matt's. I started to run when it sped up ahead of me, and a man in a ski mask jumped out at me. I just knew it was Matt. From here, things happened very fast. I tried to run the other way, but he grabbed me from behind, and was struggling to get my wrists into handcuffs while simultaneously pulling me towards his car. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and fighting like hell. We fought each other for a few minutes like that before he dropped the handcuffs and I was able to slam my heel into his foot. I think those things and my relentless struggling shook his confidence, because he ran back to his car and sped off. Freaked out, I ran back to my room, constantly looking back to see if he was after me. Thankfully, he didn't follow, and I was able to call the police. I was very lucky that night, not only because I got away, but also because he was caught shortly after I called 911. He was arrested, and when the police searched his car, they found handcuffs, duct tape, and a knife. During interrogation, he confessed that he was bitter and depressed over his breakup and wanted to make someone feel the pain that he felt. Nearly a year later, after a painful testimony from me, he was convicted to 40 years in prison, with a 32-year suspension for abduction and intent to defile. I hope I never meet that madman again. Number 5. Something terrifying happened to me today. I was staying in a hotel about 275 miles from my home. I've been in the city for a couple of days now, but we just switched up hotels last night due to the fact that the other one was mold infested and gross. Anyways, we're here to drop off my brother off at college, and tonight was his last night with us before we left. We decided to have a silly string fight in the hotel parking lot and run around the outside of the hotel and just fun, stupid teenager things. Somebody was standing on top of the stairs that lead to the second floor of the hotel, watching and staring at us. No big deal though. We were pretty loud and obnoxious. My brother and my mum left to bring my brother back to his dorm room. I decided to stay behind at the hotel room, as all I've been doing for the past 3 days was riding in a car, and I needed a break. So I stayed behind and I was on the phone with my friend, Adrian. So here I am, talking to Adrian on the phone, when all of a sudden someone knocks on the door, the same exact way that my mum does. We have one of those secret knocks, and I was about to swing open the door per usual, as I was 99% certain that it was my mother. But something told me to look out of the peephole for some reason. And the person standing outside my hotel room was definitely not my mum. In fact, it was the same person watching us earlier on top of the stairs. I'm very paranoid, so obviously I didn't answer the door. I start freaking out and talking to Adrian really quietly, and the person then yells,
"Open this fucking door!"
and starts banging harder on the door. I sit there talking quietly to Adrian for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I slowly walk back up to the door and go to look through the peephole when this person slams their body weight against the door and starts viciously shaking the handle. At this point, I text my brother on Snapchat at least 30 times to come back to the hotel. He says they're about 10 minutes away and to just sit tight, and that he's coming back. He does. But by the time they get back, the person is gone. But this isn't where the story ends. Last night, I went to the front desk as we were leaving to go to take my brother back to his dorm. I decided to go with them this time when they came back to the hotel. Before we left, I told the staff that if anyone asked for a key card to my room, to not give it to them. As with this hotel, they don't require any ID or proof of you being in that room. You just ask for a key to room X, and they give it to you. Apparently, my paranoia paid off, because according to the front desk clerk, the same person came back and asked for a key to my room. I'm not sure what would have happened if I would have opened that door, or if they would have managed to obtain a key to my room. And I don't want to find out either. Number 6. The hotel I worked at was small, only 53 rooms in the entire place. It's located next to downtown in a town central in Minnesota. As a night audit, you worked by yourself with the shift being from 11 PM to 7 AM. You don't get many people checking into the hotel at night, 3 at the most. The first duty as the night audit was to lock the doors so only guests could get in with their key. And there is also a phone on the wall next to the main entrance in case someone arrives after the doors are locked or somebody orders pizza or what have you. And there is a front door in the lobby, a back door in the lobby, and 2 side doors. I proceeded to lock all of the doors and head into the back room behind the front desk to do laundry. As there are no staff on hand to do the laundry, another task for the night audit is to finish any remaining laundry that wasn't finished during the day. There is a cordless phone that you can bring with you when you go into the back or around the other parts of the hotel. We had no more scheduled check-ins that night, but there was a couple of rooms available. I heard somebody try open the front door, but was unsuccessful and left. Moments later, the phone rang, and when I answered, the other person did not talk right away. I walked up to the front desk and the person finally started to talk. They went on a spiel that they were a former cop. And forgive me, this part is a bit fuzzy, and I blacked out due to the fear. But they went on to say something about having a court order in the morning, and if they weren't let in, that they were gonna come in and shoot me, and that they were circling the hotel. There are windows that look out to the front of the hotel that are visible from the computer that I had walked to during the phone call. I told them that I was sorry, that we didn't have any rooms available, and they hung up before I even finished my sentence. I looked out of the window, and there was a person standing across the street staring back at me with a phone in their hand. At this point, I'm really freaking out, and I go to all the doors to double check that they were all locked. It was a good thing I checked, because one of the side doors had been propped open with a doorstop. Obviously, I shut the door and proceeded to go to a conference room with sight of where the person was standing. I kept the lights off and peeked through the blinds, but the person was gone. I was pretty freaked out the rest of the night because there are windows pretty much everywhere in this hotel. So if this person was watching me, they would have been able to do it all night if they wanted to. Thankfully, nothing happened after that, but it certainly freaked me out for a while. Number 7. So, this is back in 2013. I get a ride to my friend Kathy's house on a Friday night, thinking I'm staying there. Well, lack of communication between 2 19-year-old girls is lacking, and she thought that she was staying at my place. So, here we were on a playground trying to find something to do, or somewhere to be for the night. She remembers this cute guy who gave her his number as a customer at work. His name is Jack. So, she texts him, and he agrees to hang out. Since I'm with her, he brings along his cousin, Timmy. The plan is, she's with Jack, my date is Timmy. They pull up, 2 fairly skinny Italian fellows. They are both wearing white V-necks, black skinny jeans, and cowboy boots. And Timmy had on a Gucci scarf. I live in New Hampshire. So, we get in the truck, 1 cab, and we're all squished in. We decide we're going to a hotel for the night. In the truck, this song that I love comes on, and I exclaim that I love it. Timmy changes it. Okay. We got to a Holiday Inn, and get to the room. We're in our respective pairs, and hanging out for the night. There's just a really weird vibe coming from them, as if they are always whispering without saying a word to each other, just glances. So, we turn on the TV. A show comes on that I love, and I say, "Oh, this one's awesome." Timmy changes it. Okay bro, getting really annoyed here. On the other bed, Jack is trying to get with Kathy, asking her to take off her sweatshirt, cuddle, etc. And she's uncomfortable, and is warding him off as best as she can. I, on the other hand, am giving this asshole Timmy a back rub, despite him being seemingly rude. Eventually, we fall asleep. All of us. Here comes the morning. Kathy and I are awake, but acting like we're asleep as the cousins get up. We can hear them talking. Jack says,
I don't know, man. She wouldn't give it up. And her friend's here. I can't try it.
Timmy replies,
Yeah, I couldn't touch the other one, man. So any jail time wouldn't be worth it.
They both agreed to go to the lobby and get breakfast. As soon as the other door closed, Kathy and I shot up and got out of there. As soon as we left the room and made it to the door of the stairwell, we heard voices behind us talking about dumping the girls. They turned a corner and didn't even see us as we flew down the stairwell out the back door and hugged the building. We had no ride, nowhere to go, but we didn't care. We needed to get out. We ended up finding a honeydew donut, and I'm sitting with my back to the window, drinking a coffee, Kathy facing me, when she tells me to get up against the wall. And there they are, pulling out of the hotel. After they passed, we sat back down. And then they called, 15 minutes after they pulled out. And additional to those 15 minutes, they were in the room for about an hour. It's not like they gave a damn where we were. I ended up calling my brother to pick us up, and all was well. Fast forward 2 months later, Kathy sends me a link to the local newspaper about 2 cousins who had abducted a mentally challenged girl, got her drunk, raped, and beat her, and then left her on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere to essentially rot. And what do you know? It's those 2 same cousins that we spent the night with. And at least in their mugshots, they're not wearing matching outfits anymore. In short, that could have been Kathy and I. It's the only time I have ever been thankful for being considered unattractive. Number 8. I work as a night auditor for a rather large international chain of hotels. It's a good job. Boring, easy, and the pay is far from mediocre for a college student. When I got in tonight, the second shift guys told me to be on the lookout for a man connected to a stabbing earlier in the day. I shrugged it off. The hotel was located in a rather safe spot. They intersect between city and the county patrol, so you'd see a marked car just about every hour. I wasn't worried about this man running into my hotel at all. I guess that's how most of these start off, isn't it? I wasn't worried about, maybe I should have given a bit more head to my fellow associates' warning. About 2 hours ago, I was enjoying the isolation of the back room. The door locked, the CCTV on one screen, and Netflix on the other. When, all of a sudden, from the corner of my eye, I see somebody walk right in front of camera 3, which is located at the front door. Great. A customer? No. I wish. So here's the backstory. The man was drunk, wrecked his car, called a tow truck, and stabbed the driver in the neck for some reason. And the guy then proceeds to evade police for well over 30 miles in a gigantic pink tow truck. So I reckon he parked it somewhere nearby and decided a hotel is a great place to lay low. He walked straight in. I met him at the front desk, sweating bullets, but maintaining my cool a tad bit. I let the guy check in, and even though his card declined, I gave him his room key and watched him go up on the cameras until I was sure that he was in the room. The police are standing in the lobby as I type this. The man did get arrested that night. Number 9. A few years ago, my friend and I were staying in a hotel at a horse show that we were competing in. We were probably only 14 or 15, so her mum was staying with us too. I remember it being a sketchy hotel. We even brought sleeping bags and our own pillows because it didn't seem clean. One night, my friend Megan and I went to the hot tub without her mother to unwind after a long day. When we got there was a man sitting in a chair by the pool, fully clothed. I didn't pay much attention to him, but it only occurred to me later how weird it was that he was there with all of his clothes on when my friend and I were only the other people there. Almost immediately after Megan and I got there, before we even got into the hot tub, we got up and left. And maybe 10 minutes later, these two girls that look a little older than us, maybe 17 to 18, come in and sit in the hot tub with us. Megan and I don't think anything of it and just keep talking about our day, until one of the girls catches on that we're talking about a horse show and says something along the lines of, "Cool, so you're staying at this hotel?" And we said yes, we were here for a 3-day event. And from there the girls make small talk with us. And at some point Megan mentioned that we were there with her mother, and there was nothing weird about anything the girls said. It was just weird that they were talking to us since they were obviously older and we didn't know them. Eventually though, they invited us back to their hotel room. Megan and I were understandably apprehensive and said that we had to get up early, so we were going to bed soon. The girls were persistent, saying we could come and hang out and that we were looking to meet some new friends, which seemed weird since, like I said, it was a dumpy hotel in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. Not exactly the place you take a vacation with your friend and try to meet new people. They even said we could stay over with them, so we wouldn't have to go back and sleep with Megan's mum. Megan and I were insisting that we had a long day and just wanted to go to bed and not hang out. But eventually we just left because the girls wouldn't stop talking about it. At the time, Megan and I decided not to tell her mum because we realized it was a weird situation and didn't want her mum to ban us from going to the hot tub alone. It wasn't until years later that I realized it could have been a human trafficking scheme because of the strange man that was there at first and the girls' persistence to get us back to their rooms. It still makes my skin crawl. Number 10. This is one of the oddest things I've ever witnessed, and although I wasn't this weirdo's target, it was still awfully creepy to see. And on a road trip to Florida with my best friend Carl and my parents, we decided to stop over at a cheap hotel in West Virginia to sleep for the night. We got there at about 10 p.m. and being two teenage girls who'd been sitting in a car for the last day, we were still wound up. We explored, running into this group of guys with thick southern accents. They tried their hand at awkward teenage flirting before giving up. I will never forget Carl's excuse for not giving her number. She told them that she'd accidentally microwaved her phone last month. So we just parted ways, knowing they were normal, albeit awkward teenage boys. Carl and I kept exploring the hotel's floors, before deciding to race each other down the first floor's main hallway, sort of right next to the lobby. As we're laughing and speeding down this hallway, we run past this room with the door wide open, and since I was running at full speed, all I saw was a bunch of shiny things all over the floor, in front of and in the doorway, and a big blobby blur in the middle of it all. We get to the end of the hallway and ask each other what the hell that was. We sneak back slowly and peer around the corner, and in the doorway of this room, there's this really obese man laying on his stomach, with his chin resting on his hands, like he's trying to be cute. And all around him, he's got silverware and tiny metal trinkets laid out. When he noticed us, he smiled weirdly, but didn't move anything besides his torso to face us a little better. We sprint back to my parents' room, but they're out getting food, so we're alone. We freak out and make fun of the situation for about 15 minutes, then decide to go back down. On the stairway from the second floor, we run into that same group of boys from earlier. One of them asks if we saw the weird guy down there, and when we say yes, the guys start to freak out. Apparently, one of the kids tells us that his little brother, not sure how old, had been walking down the hallway from their room to the other end of the first floor to the vending machine, and that weird guy called out to him and stopped him. The man then asked the kid if he wanted him to come into his room and offered him one of his weird trinkets. The kid had the good sense to say no friggin' thanks, but what the hell was that guy trying to get a kid into his room for? I think the hotel manager eventually stepped in and made the guy close his door. I hope the kid's parents complained and or called the police. I was too young to even realize how messed up that was. So to make light of it, Kyle and I nicknamed that guy the Wiggling West Virginia Spoon Man. And this made for a really wild story that no one believed when we got back to school after the break. Number 11. Okay, obligatory backstory. I live in a tiny town in northern Kentucky. When I say tiny, I mean microscopic. Nice neighborhood, if a little stereotypically southern. Low crime rate. Everyone knows everyone. Lots of fundamentalists. Lots of pickup trucks. Not my particular cup of tea as an adult, but on the whole, it seemed like a very safe place to grow up. You walk to school, no school bus. The city is so small you can get from one end to the other in about 20 minutes on foot. Big football town. Not much else to do really. The biggest points of interest are the church, the football field, and the Kroger. And this happened to me when I was 16 years old. It was a typical Friday night, and I was at home watching TV and hanging out with my kid brother, who was 9 at the time. We recently had new neighbors move in next door, and their kid, Austin, was his age. They became best friends pretty much immediately. And there's always a football game on Friday nights in season, and the whole town is there. Lots of my friends, and his friends too. I wasn't partial to the games. Once I had seen one, I had seen them all. I would still occasionally walk down to the field and meet up with buddies to do something after, but that is about the extent of it. The phone rings, and my brother gets it first. I'm quite sure we were playing a video game of some kind, and around this time, I'm fairly sure it was Smash Brothers Melee on the old GameCube. He was intimidatingly good for his age, and we had a nice sibling rivalry going on. He always played with Roy, and I with Marth. These matches were absolute nail-biters. He hangs up and tells me Austin is at the game with his folks, and can we please go down and get him? I didn't want to go down there to be in a huge crowd of sweaty rednecks, and told him so. But Jen, his mum, says that he can't walk home without us, and that he wants to come home and hang out, and we can do a 3-person tournament. Come on, Jen, please. Fuck it. Fine, okay, let's go. It's a 10-minute walk maximum, and at least we wouldn't have to stay. We'll go down, and we're grabbing Austin, and then we're noping it back to here to play some more Melee. We head up our dead-end street, hang a left, and start down the main road. The sports complex is on this road, and it's just at the bottom of the hill. It was about twilight, and from the top of the hill, we could already hear the marching band and the cheering. I didn't see many folks around, but nothing looked unusual. I really didn't expect to see anyone. Pretty much everyone was down at the game. He's doing the typical kid brother thing as we walked. Hey Jen, did you know owls can turn their heads almost completely around? Hey Jen, me and Austin had a shoe throwing contest,
and my shoe went so far I almost couldn't see it anymore.
Hey Jen.
Look at this flower. It's awesome.
At about the halfway mark, I see a gold SUV pull up across the street, just opposite where we were walking. It sits for about 10, maybe 15 seconds, and then a man gets out, just as we are passing by, so that he's behind us now. Older guy, mid-40s. In retrospect, he screamed creeper, weasel face, tall and wiry. Weird fucking smile and a sneer at the same time. At the time, however, I didn't think twice. Of course, just a guy going to the game, probably meeting up with his family. Brother on my left, me on the right. We keep walking normally. After about 30 seconds or so, I hear shuffling. I turn around out of reflex just to glance at what's going on. This guy is gaining on us. Okay, no big deal. He's probably trying to not miss anything. He'll probably walk right on past. I would have loved to keep a brisker pace myself, but I had the kid brother in tow, and his 9-year-old legs just can't handle speed walking. We keep walking as usual, but now I've made a mental note. A little more time goes by, maybe a minute, and I start thinking, wonder why he hasn't breezed on by us. The guy sure looked like he was in a hurry, so I turn around again. This man is right behind us, and I mean close enough for me to see the creepiest smile and sneer that I have ever seen on the face of a person. Only he wasn't behind us per se, he was directly behind my brother. And when I happened to glance back, he had his arms out in front of him. He was reaching for my brother and almost had a hold of his upper arm. I caught this motherfucker nearly in mid-snatch. I reached out my left hand and put it around my brother's back. Probably 5 seconds went by, but it felt like a lot longer than that. After I had an arm barrier, I do a quick scan of the street. There is no one else around. No witnesses, no help. I'm only 16. This guy is a lot bigger than me. What the fuck am I gonna do? I lean down and say, as quietly and as calmly as I can, "Come on, Ross. Let's get there. I bet I can go faster than you." I start to speed walk, and so does my brother. I have my arm on his back and I'm half pushing him, rushing him along as fast as he can walk. I can see the sports complex and it's just down the hill. We're about a minute or so away at most. After about another 30 seconds or so, I'm not quite sure, but the whole thing seemed to go by in slow motion. I turn around again. This guy is speed walking too. He's matching our pace to keep right behind my brother, and he's gaining again. Now I really start to panic. He is really after us. There is no other explanation. I don't know him, and I almost caught him grabbing the kid. Now he's almost in grabbing distance again. He's picking up speed, and he's fucking smiling. Well, sneering. It was a predatory look. I turn back around and I see that we are so close to the stadium. So fucking close. If we can just get there a little more, the property opens up, and there'll be people everywhere. I have to get down to all those people, right now. I try to sound calm, but I'm sure I didn't at this point. "Let's run, Ross. Come on, I'll race ya." And we take off running. I'm looking more at him than what's ahead of me. I'm trying to keep him in my sight the entire time. He thinks it's a game. He smiled and started running his little heart out. I remember feeling a tiny speck of relief. Oh god, he doesn't know he's about to get raped and murdered, and he's pretty fast. He's in it to win it. I see the entrance to the stadium, and I think we're gonna be home free by now. I turn around and this fucking guy is fucking running. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I knew at that point beyond a shadow of a doubt that this guy is only running to catch us. Well, not me, but my brother. He started to gain. but he's not close enough yet. I whipped back around and sped up to my personal max speed, and of course the kid pumps his own legs to the max, because he wants to win a race against his sister so he can brag about it. Once again, I'm looking directly at him more than the street in front of me, so I can be sure he's still there with me. I hear his thuds on the pavement and I know he's getting close. My heart was sending electrical currents of fear to the rest of my body, and just as I heard him coming right behind us, we hit the stadium grounds. It was a sharp left turn, and bam. People. There were people everywhere. It was half time and the adults were out in the entrance area smoking and talking. And the view of the entranceway and all the people was obscured by a stone archway on the street, marking the stadium grounds. I had never been so happy to see a bunch of sweaty rednecks in all my life. The guy came right behind, and the second he turned the corner after us and saw all the people, he panicked. I could see the surprise and fear in his eyes. I had turned around at that moment to see where he was, and I looked right at him and locked eyes with him in this beautiful moment. He looked around at everyone, looked at me, looked at my brother, and walked away, back the way we had all come. Ross was out of breath, but still nudged me to go and collect Austin. I said, "Give me just a second." I peeked around the stone archway and watched this guy walk, not run, but walk back up the street. I stood there and watched him walk all the way back up the hill, walk across the street, and get back in his SUV, and drive away. I think that's when it fully hit me of the very real situation we were just in, and the very real danger. That fucking guy was there to get us. Well, not us per se, but my brother. What's more, he probably would have, had we not made it to the stadium. The crowd spooked him, and most likely that's what saved my brother's life. We found Austin, but I made the whole gang wait until the game was over, and caught a ride with his folks. No burden on them. We lived right next door. I was shaken up for the rest of the night and for a couple days after. And this kind of town is the last place in the world you have thoughts about being snatched in. I also have never told anyone. I never told my parents. I never told my brother. He's almost 20 years old now, and could probably handle it. But I just never saw a reason to give him a complex about something that happened years ago. I also never told the police. I have no idea what happened to the gold SUV guy. I don't know if he lived around here, or far away. I don't know if he's been caught, went to jail, or if he's still out there somewhere. I do know for certain, though, that he was there to kidnap my brother that day. I don't know what kind of fucked up plans he had for him, but then again, I don't care to dwell on it. I don't know if I did the right thing or the wrong thing, or just how close my brother came to whatever the fuck SUV guy had in the works, but I don't care to dwell on that either. I can tell you, however, that there was once a time in my life in which I meaningfully uttered the phrase, "Thank fuck for sweaty rednecks." Number 12. This story happened about 5 years ago in a fairly small town in Illinois. I was 26 years old at the time. My husband and I were looking to rent a small house. We needed a place bigger than our one bedroom, one that would accommodate us and 2 of his cousins, and they would be staying with us for an extended vacation from another country. I went to look at a set of attached houses, and was joined on my tour by another older woman. She asked me what I did for work, and I told her that I work with children with special needs. She said that she had a son with a disability, and if we both moved in, I could help him. I didn't think much more of it at the time. Flash forward a few weeks, and we're in the move-in process. The houses occur in groups of 4, with 2 groups on the left side of the street and 2 on the right, total of 16 houses. The road is basically a dead end. We move into the second house of the quad on the right side, and the lady I toured with moves into the second on the left side, exactly across from us. On either side of our house is a family with children, grandparents raising a 13-year-old granddaughter, and a Brady Bunch step family raising multiple children, with at least 2 to 3 preteen girls. This matters later, I promise. Everyone seemed friendly and family-oriented. A few weeks after we move in, we are waiting for his cousins to arrive. I see the lady I toured with occasionally, but never see a small child with a disability. She does have what appears to be an adult son living with her, mid-20s, average height, slightly bulky. He often sits on patio furniture in his garage with the door open. When I'm coming home or leaving, we wave and say hi, but that's about it. A lot of the people in the neighborhood use their garages as patios. It's very weird and I can't explain it. One night, it's about 3 a.m. I'm in graduate school and stay up all hours of the night studying. My husband works midnights in a Toyota factory and won't be home for about 4 hours. I had just laid down about 20 minutes before, but was not asleep yet. That was going to suck at 6:30 a.m. But 4 hours a night was the norm then. All of a sudden, I hear a loud knock at the door. I go to answer it. But about 2 feet away is an oversized set of windows that looks into the living room. They're covered with blinds and peeking out is clearly noticed by the person at the door. I skip this and talk through the door. I'll stop here and say that I'm inherently naive. I trust everyone. But I'm getting somewhat better since we moved into a city, since this incident occurred. At the other side of the door is the neighbor's adult son. He tells me that his mother left for work and he forgot his keys. Could I let him borrow my phone to call his mother? I go to unlock the door, justifying that I know this man from the neighborhood and I wanted to help. At the last second, my brain kicks it. I tell him that I'll dial the number for him, and then I go and get my phone. When I return, I see the handle jiggling. Why didn't I stop then? I don't know. Instead, I ask for the number. I still don't know why I didn't open the door. I'm very naive, but also very thankful something stopped me. He rattles off a bunch of numbers. The area code wasn't right, and it wasn't even for a telephone number. I asked him to repeat it, thinking maybe I misheard. He says, "Oh, that's okay. My mum just pulled up." Remember, his house is parallel to mine. I look out the window and no one has arrived. The garage door isn't open. No car is in the driveway. No lights are on. He walks over and walks directly into the home from the front door. After taking a few deep breaths, I try to decide if I should call 911 or if maybe I'm being paranoid. Somehow, maybe I missed his mum's arrival. It wasn't possible, but I didn't want to think about the alternative. However, at that moment a police car pulled up, lights on. The couple on the left side of this man's house is a young lesbian couple who coincidentally work with my husband. They come out to meet the police. I also go out, thinking that I can at least ask him to follow up, once whatever he was called for was resolved. Turns out, the same man that tried to open my door had tried to open their door and tried to walk in. Because they also worked midnights but had a day off, they also kept late hours. They were watching TV, heard him and called the cops. I tell the police my story and go back to bed. I figure I'm overreacting because he didn't ask me to make a statement or otherwise record my issue. More of a, I'll check this all out, little ladies sort of thing. The next day, I'm talking to the grandmother of the 13-year-old and the mother with multiple kids that live on either side of me. Apparently, he watched their daughters playing outside. and even asked one of them to come over and sit on his lap in the garage. The grandmother said that he tried to open the bedroom window of the girl, but it was locked. I don't know if they reported this to the police, but they said he was asked to move by the landlord. His mother could stay, but he wasn't allowed to live there or visit. After that, things calmed down. We did notice tool marks on the back door, which opened directly into the master bedroom. I know for a fact the marks weren't there when we moved in, as I took pictures to ensure that we were returned our deposit. However, I didn't observe them until a few weeks later, and he was already gone. I can't say for sure if he did it prior, or if it was someone else later. Either isn't a comforting choice. Many months later, near the end of our 1-year lease, I start to see the son around again. He wasn't consistently at the home like before, but appears to visit once a week or so. One night around 2:30 a.m, there is a loud knock on the door. This time, my husband, who had switched to a daytime shift by that time, answers through the door. As soon as the person hears a male voice, they turn and walk away. They are wearing a hoodie and dark clothes, and he can't see their face. The body type is very similar. The person walks at an angle away from our house in the general direction of the back of the neighbor's house. It was unclear if he was walking towards a creek, swamp area with an open field behind, or to the back of the row of houses across from us. Either way, I called the landlord the next day. He confirmed the man wasn't supposed to live there, said he had mental challenges, but didn't elaborate, and said he would follow up. We never saw him again, and unluckily moved across the country a few weeks later. Number 13. For a bit of context, I grew up in the middle of a farmland in a large 1800s Victorian home. Given its history, there's always been several shacks and barns that once belonged to the builder of this house. There is a highway that sees maybe 3 cars on it during the night, and directly across from said highway, about 200 feet inward of a cornfield, is a shack that I have always found creepy. As kids, myself and friends would dare each other to go inside and look, which always ended up with us going as a team. Nothing scary was ever found. Maybe a few broken glasses, metal piles, and miscellaneous items. And there was no electricity or any sort of utility that made it homely. Years go by and the existence of the shack becomes a part of my daily life. However, one particular night, as I was watching TV, I noticed a light going off and on outside of my window. After getting startled, I dismissed it as passing cars, simply more frequent than they typically are. An hour passes, it's nearing midnight, and the light stays on. This time I know for sure it's coming from outside. My family was asleep, but being my pantsy 16-year-old self, I needed confirmation. Too bad for me, no one wants to go check it out. So I go alone. I grab my pocket knife and a flashlight, the best I could think of with my shaken thoughts, and take off into the night. As I neared the highway, the light turns off, almost making me choke on air. But I had to figure out what the hell was going on. I make it to the entrance of the shack, which has no door, and slowly begin to enter, my flashlight scanning the room for any sign of life. What happened next, I'll never forget. 5 feet away from me, there is an old tattered recliner facing away that my father had tossed in there for future disposal. I shine my light on it because I knew that I'd seen it rock ever so slightly. As I did that, a man stands up from the recliner saying absolutely nothing. All I could tell was that he was middle-aged and wearing a jacket of sorts. Before I could process what was happening, I was already sprinting across the road and praying that he wasn't behind me. It felt like years before I could make it to my door, but as I'm about to make it into safety, I decide to look back. He was standing in the road, completely still, no words whatsoever. It's been 7 years since then. The shack still stands, the recliner remains in place. My dad never believed me. I wish someone could share the dread that I had when I realized the recliner was facing a window which was directed straight at my house. Number 14. So, I still remember this happening so vividly. It was terrifying to the point that I had to remove my rooms as I was too scared to sleep in my original one. So here is the story. It's a bit long. The houses in this suburb were back to back. So basically, there was a street, a line of houses, a fence sectioning them off, and another line of houses, and then their street. Their backyards were what touched each other, so you could basically climb your backyard fence and land in your neighbor's backyard. This is important to understand for the layout. In my house, towards the back of the house was the laundry room, and then my room with a large glass door leading outside. It had windows on the inside, on which sat on a concreted side passage that connected the front of the house to the backyard. My bed was pushed against the wall, with the window above and next to it. 9-year-old me was a night owl. As a kid, I used to pretend to go to sleep and wait for the all clear, then turn on the lamp and read my books. This particular night, it was windy, so you could hear the dry leaves being blown up and down the side passage. It was around midnight when I heard the leaves shifting and moving around outside a lot quicker than before. Assuming the wind had picked up, I kept reading. The noise was growing louder and louder, and it seemed to stop right by my window. The house is an older house, and it sits on stilts, so my window would have been 2 to 3 feet off the ground. I heard a bang against the wall, and then a scraping noise. I froze, sitting in bed, as that noise came from right behind me. I panicked as the scraping was more and more frequent, and I turned the lamp off and did what every child would do in that situation. I retreated under the covers and hid while listening. My heart was pounding, and I can still feel the fear till this day. The noise stopped and I heard the crunching on the leaves as whatever it was walking away. I was trying to gather the courage to run to my parents' room, which was at the front of the house, but that meant I had to walk past the glass door. Then I heard a thump up the stairs to the back door, then the clamoring of the wind chimes. They were metal and hung low, so whoever it was could not see them in the dark and must have knocked them as they were peering into the door. I heard them grab it and throw them to the ground. This was followed by tapping and scratching, and they even tried the door handle. I screamed to high heaven, hoping that my dad would wake up. I heard the person clamor away, and I got up and ran to my parents' room. I woke up my dad in a panic and declaring that someone is outside. He took off with a baseball bat and no pants, like the knight in shining armor that he was. I didn't know how long it was, but he did come back and told me that he could not find anybody, and I should go back to bed. I refused and slept in the lounge room that night. I got to a point where I was so unsettled my parents had to shift all the rooms around to move me from that room. It was only years later, when I was 20 and we were at a family dinner talking about things we did when we were young, and I brought up this particular story. My dad turns to me and says that since we don't live there anymore, and I guess I can tell you what had happened that night, he did find someone. In fact, he found our neighbor, Bill, whom was the father of one of my friends from school. He was trying to climb over the fence when my dad caught him, and the first thing he said was, "Oh, did something make her scream?" My dad refused to tell me what happened after that, but that line chills me to this day. He also found his ladder on its side near my window in the morning, which of course he did not tell me about either, as the creep was trying to climb into my room. Number 15. I've recently moved to a new area due to my work, and it's far away from my family and friends. It's a weird cul-de-sac area. I'm currently working on finding friends here, but I work Monday to Friday and go visit my parents on the weekends, so it's very hectic. I start at 7 AM and finish at around 6:30, 7 at night, so you can imagine that when I get home, I just want to eat and go to sleep. One day I came home, and there is an old couple standing outside my door. They introduced themselves as the couple that lives directly opposite my house, and even had me some home-cooked dinner. I say thank you and mention that I would invite them in, but there's still a lot of boxes everywhere, and I was quite embarrassed. I told them that I've moved to a new city on my own, for work. We small talk for a few seconds and I'm soon inside my house. I honestly put the food that they have given me in the fridge and think I'll head straight to bed. In the morning, I see the food that they'd given me, half eaten and now in the sink. I must have been way too tired last night to remember eating this. The next night, I'm coming from work and see the old lady waving at me from her kitchen window. I vaguely wave back and head inside. Nothing else happens that night. The next night, I've had the shittiest day ever at work. I had to stay behind for work half an hour overdue due to an unhappy customer, and I've been craving my bed all day. I pull up outside my house and see the old couple standing outside their house. Are they keeping a record of what time I come home? I quickly ask myself. I'm honestly not in the mood for creepy ass neighbors and making small talk again. I didn't know these people, and I don't know or understand why they're trying to socialize with me. Plus, the day I've had, I'm not in the best of moods. I brace myself for the lame conversation that I'm about to have. Getting out my car, I just wave generally in their direction and start fumbling in my purse to find the keys to my front door. "Excuse me, miss. Come over for some dinner. You look so tired," the old lady is saying to me. I vaguely say something about being too tired while generally getting annoyed. They wouldn't hold up. I open the door, and just as I was about to step in, the old guy comes across the road and even places his hand on my arm, looks me dead in my eyes and says something cheery about how his wife makes the best pie. Okay, whatever. I thought I'll go over for a cup of tea and some pie and nicely try and explain to them that I've had a shit day and that I should be heading off. Hopefully they will take the hint. After shutting the door and stepping into their house, the old guy slams the door shut and locks it. They both proceeded to tell me that around 7:30, they were looking out of the windows for me to give me some kitchen stir-fry that they had cooked and saved for me that night. They both clearly saw a man standing in my bedroom window walk downstairs and could see him in the living room window walk into the kitchen. They said they saw my car come into the cul-de-sac and then saw him rush back past the living room window and obviously up the stairs. They had called the police and had tried to stop me from entering my house. Whoever it was clearly upstairs, hiding somewhere. My heart fell. I felt dizzy. I glanced to my bedroom window expecting to see someone there, but nothing was there. Just the curtains wide open. The police turned up shortly after, and I had to wait outside while they searched the house. In the crawl space, right outside my bedroom door, they found a homeless man curled up. He'd been living there for the last 2-ish weeks, and according to him, he had snuck in when the moving packers had left the door open while struggling with something. He'd been in the house, watching me while I had been asleep, and would come out while I was at work and away for the weekends. Number 16. So, around 10 to 12 years ago, in England, I lived in a little 2-bedroom house on a long road. It's a terraced house on a long strip of other terraced houses. Back in the day, all the attics were joined, and you could literally travel through them. Years later, they realized it was a bad idea. Fires spreading, burglars, etc. And so all the attics were bricked up, so each house was secure. One night, I was soaking in the bath when I heard a noise above me. Thinking it may be an animal or something, I just ignored it. This went on for a few weeks, and only it was getting to the point that I could hear the noise when I was in the bath or shower or getting changed. I got a friend to check the attic, and he told me he didn't see anything. He just stuck his head inside, which just confirmed my animal story. Not much happened after that, for about a month or two, when one night I was alone. I was getting ready to take a shower as I was heading out with friends, and I heard the same noise above, when all of a sudden the dog started going crazy, barking and looking directly above me. Clearly, I was freaked out and decided to get ready at a friend's house instead. The next day I was outside my house when the neighbor shouted me. Now, my neighbor is creepy as hell. Small, stinky, strange looking with hint of craze in his eyes. He asked if I was okay. Being polite and trying to show him that he doesn't really bother me, I said yes, and went about my business. Just as I got to my door, he asked if I got to my friend's place okay. At first, without thinking anything, I said yes, thank you, smiled and waved goodbye. When I got inside my house, it was then that I realized that he would not know that I was at a friend's unless he had heard me on the phone. And as I was so creeped out the night previously, I was practically whispering to my friend. Anyway, I rang family members, told my dad, and they all came around. They turned the lights on in the bathroom but kept all the other lights off. I opened the attic door, and you could see 2 lights shining through to the top of the attic. 2 tiny little holes. My bathroom ceiling was quite dark, so I never noticed them. My dad went in. He was gone a while. But when he returned, he was blazing angry. He ignored everyone and walked straight outside to the neighbor's house. We heard him shouting for the neighbor to open the door. But he was not home. I asked my cousin to go back and to check it out. And when he came back down, he told me the walls separating the attics had been knocked through. Most of the brickwork was on my side, so it was knocked through from the other side. We called the police, but they told us that there was no proof that he'd done anything wrong. The neighbor told the police that he never used the attic, and the previous tenants may be to blame. Clearly, in my eyes, he was to blame, the old dirty pervert. I don't think I've ever been so disturbed, knowing that the dirty pervert had been watching me for all that time. I never stayed in that house again. Number 17. I had just moved out of a share house in the suburbs and into my own shitty 1-bedroom apartment in the city. I'm a male, and at the time I was around 25 years old. My apartment, while old and small, was located about 500 meters from one of the most popular night spots in the inner city. As I was in my mid-20s and out on my own, this was the perfect place for me. This was because my friends and I were quite social and would frequent bars and nightclubs in the city, and the taxi fares were starting to add up. Also, this new apartment was close to my work, so it made sense. I got settled in right away and invited my friends over for pre-drinks before hitting the clubs. Due to the limited space in the apartment, this meant that some friends were inside, and some were drinking on the walkway just out front. We had the music up and had just started drinking between songs. I could hear the couple next door arguing. Now, the apartment was old and shitty, which meant thin walls too, so I pressed an ear to the wall in order to listen in. I hadn't met any of my new neighbours at this time, as I didn't take long to move in, and I didn't really see anyone during the time that I was moving in. I was curious. Judging from what I could determine while eavesdropping, they were a gay couple in their early 30s. One of the men was yelling at the other to go next door and tell us to keep it down. The other was arguing that it was just a housewarming and to let it go for the night. Since I didn't want to cause trouble, I marshaled everyone outside to start making our way to the nightclubs, leaving my new neighbours in peace. Later that night, I came home alone as I was tired from the move. I decided to let my friends carry on partying without me. I arrived at my door and proceeded to fumble around for my keys, when I looked up to see a man standing on the walkway in front of the new apartment smoking a cigarette. He was tall and thin with brown, oily hair. I noticed that he also had a cut lip and a faded but still visible black eye. I said, "Good day, sir. Sorry about the noise earlier," correctly assuming that he was my neighbour. He replied, "Nah, you're alright, mate. I'm Chris," and he shook my hand. I noticed his knuckles were red and a little bit scratched up, so I knew something was off. I apologised for the noise and said, "I hope I didn't cause any trouble for you." He withdrew his hand and with a soft but cracking voice said, "Nah, that's okay. Rick just gets a bit cranky sometimes. I'm used to it." With that, I finished off the conversation and told Chris that I'd see him later. It was about 2 AM at this point and I just wanted to sleep, but couldn't help worrying about the potential domestic abuse going on next door. I decided to just keep an eye on it for now, so I didn't have all the info. For all I knew, he could have gotten into a fight with someone else. As the weeks passed, I noticed that my new neighbours got drunk regularly and would argue almost every time. I could tell that Rick was the dominant one, as his voice was a lot deeper and Chris seemed to be afraid of him during their shouting matches. This is why I kept my distance. I never really socialised with them. I would even overhear them arguing about me and that Rick thought that Chris liked me. I would just tune all of this out with headphones and video games, not to mention an active social life and full-time work to keep me occupied. I did find myself avoiding having guests over because of the neighbours. I would opt to meet people out, as their arguments could be quite upsetting. This was working out fine enough for a while, until Christmas Eve that same year. I was arriving home after having come from last-minute Christmas shopping. I was getting ready for a night of present wrapping, as I was to visit my family the following day for Christmas. As I arrived home, I noticed 2 police cars outside, and Anna, an Asian woman who lived a few apartments up from Chris, was screaming. I asked her what was happening, and all she said was, "It's just so sad," while sobbing. I could see 3 officers trying to restrain somebody, and there was blood on their uniforms. I came just a little bit closer to see Chris's oily brown hair in the center of the affray. His face was bleeding from his jaw, where he had apparently been slashed by something sharp. They got him to his feet, and I could see that his cheek had been cut so deep that the skin was flapping open as he struggled and resisted with the police. I recoiled in shock and went to comfort Anna, who was crying uncontrollably at this point. Suddenly, Rick's voice boomed out from nowhere. "You see what you've done? You fucking loser. Just kill yourself." This frightened me, and my instinct was to get myself and Anna to safety. And even though the cops were here, they had their hands full with Chris, and I certainly didn't want to get involved in such an ugly fight where knives were involved. Anna refused to come with me and said that she would be fine. I looked around to see where Rick was, as he kept yelling at Chris the whole time, with the 3 cops struggling to restrain him. I could also hear Chris whimpering apologetically in between. I couldn't see where Rick was, so I decided to just go to my apartment and lock the door. As I turned to go, I froze in horror as Rick's voice boomed. "Where the fuck are you going?" A deep chill went down my spine as my brain struggled to reconcile the fact that these words were coming out of Chris's mouth. I felt panic grip me as I realized that all this time, Rick and Chris were the same person. All of the fighting, laughing, drinking, and crying that I couldn't even help overhearing over the last couple of months had come from one solitary person. A lonely man in his small one-bedroom apartment. For some reason, this made me feel sick. I learnt later from Anna that this wasn't the first time the police had to come out to take Chris away. Anna explained that he spends a couple of months at the local psychiatric hospital each time. His father owns the apartment, so it's here waiting for him when he gets out. I moved out a few months later, and while it's a sad situation for Chris, and I really do feel for him, I just hope that I never see him again.
Number 18.
So, this story starts about 2 months ago at my apartment complex. My fiancé and I were sitting on our balcony at around 2 a.m. when we began to hear this strange metallic clanking sound. We both got up to look and saw a woman walking down the street towards our building, wearing a fully face covering lizard mask and carrying a metal baseball bat. The noise that we heard was her nonchalantly tapping the bat off of the concrete as she walked towards us. For background, our apartment complex is on the top of a hill in the middle of the woods, so there is no reason anyone other than our neighbors would be in the area. My fiancé and I are obviously a little freaked out at this point, so we hid on our balcony and watched as she walked into our building and out of sight. We assumed she was just one of our neighbors coming from a really weird party after drinking too much and laughed it off. Until last night. Last night, as we were sitting on our balcony, our neighbor came out and asked, "Was that you last night?" After convincing him that we had no idea what the hell he was talking about, he told us what had happened to him the night before. Apparently, he had gotten back to our building at around 2 a.m. and taken the elevator up, rather than walk up to the 5th floor, where we all live. When the elevator reached our floor and the doors opened, the same girl in the lizard mask was standing there holding the bat. When he put his hand up and asked her if she was okay, she didn't respond to him, didn't flinch, move out of his way. Nothing. She just stood there, like she was in a trance, in his own words. She then pushed past him onto the elevator and stood there facing him until the doors shut. After getting to his apartment and making sure that his wife and baby hadn't been killed by a bat-wielding psycho, he went out into his balcony and there she was, standing in the parking lot. He watched her walk down the street towards the leasing office about 300 yards, turn around and walk back towards our building, taking an especially long route and passing right under our balconies. She then walked into our building, and we haven't seen her since. Hopefully it stays that way.
Number 19.
Let me start by saying that at the time this began, about 3 months ago, my wife and I, along with our 3 children, had been living in this apartment for about 3 months. We're very quiet people, just a lesbian couple with some kiddos. And because we live in the Bible Belt, people tend to give us sort of a wide berth. Both my wife and I also tend to give off a do not fuck with us vibe, due to past experiences. Most of the time, people don't. So, we've been living in a nice townhouse apartment in a nice, quiet area of our city, which itself is smallish, minding our own business and going about our lives. I usually go home at about 7 to 8 p.m. at this point, and my wife and I would spend time together with our two youngest kids, who are teenagers, until their 9:30 p.m. bedtime. At about 10:30 p.m., my wife would leave the apartment to go and get our oldest son from work, and I would settle in for bed myself, as I gotta get up early for work the next day. And this had been our routine for about 3 months, and we were all pretty settled into it. So, one evening, I'm laying there in bed, checking my emails as I try to wind down enough to go to sleep. The light in my second floor bedroom, which is visible from the street in front of our building, is off. And directly below me, and right next to our front door, is our first floor bathroom, where the light is off. The kids are asleep, and the dogs, 2 of them, are snoozing at the foot of my bed, and I'm quickly approaching sleep myself. The house is quiet and clearly closed up for the night. My car is in our spot right in the front, also locked up. Somewhat distractedly, I hear a loud, broken-sounding car pull up into our parking lot, but I don't pay a lot of attention to it. I know what my wife's car sounds like, and this isn't it. I figure it's one of our neighbors or their guests. A few minutes later, I heard the tapping. It was a very distinct sound, the sound of fingernails tapping against glass. Immediately I felt a chill go up my spine. It's the middle of the night. Why would someone be tapping on a window at this time? I laid quiet for a moment, waiting for someone to look out their door and go, "Dude, wrong house," or something along those lines. I was waiting for this to happen, but that didn't happen. Instead, the tapping continued. It would go on for a few minutes, stop for a minute or two, and resume. It was directly below my bedroom, and I could hear it very clearly. Someone was tapping on our bathroom window. Here is where I was stupid. I would love to say that I called the cops and some creeper was arrested, but that isn't what happened. Instead, I texted my wife, and it went something like, "Please tell me you got back early and you're tapping on the window because you suck at jokes." She texted back immediately with something along the lines of, "No, I'm on my way now." At this point, I'm seriously creeped out. I flipped on the bedroom light, hoping that it would scare the tapper off, but no dice. The tapping continued. Finally, I slipped out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat from our closet, and crept down the stairs. Again, I don't know why I didn't call the cops. I remember being worried about scaring the kids or overreacting. I didn't want one of the city cops that I work with laughing at me because there was a squirrel out my window or something. So I was handling this myself. The downstairs was still completely dark, silent except for the tapping, and I was careful not to make any noise. I slipped right up to the front door and very quietly turned the deadbolt. It wasn't locked previously because I knew my wife would be coming back and didn't want to inconvenience her. After this, I peeped through our blinds. Nothing. No one was on the porch. Confused and still freaked out, I went back downstairs. As soon as I turned out the light, the tapping started again. This time, I flipped a light. I turned the light back on and called my wife. Sort of panicked, still listening to this steady tapping from the window downstairs. She has a cooler head than I do, and told me that she was hanging up to call the police. For the 20 minutes or so that it took her to get home, I was huddled in the bed, clutching my dachshund, Useless beast that she is, clearly, and listening to this tapping. It stopped 5 or 6 minutes before she arrived, and I heard the sound of that very loud, broken sounding car again. The police arrived a minute or so after my wife and took a report. The cop, who I knew, chastened me thoroughly for not calling them first, right when it started. My wife did the same. They definitely didn't think I was overreacting, and there was evidence that someone had been there. The dirt in our front garden was disturbed, some plants were crushed, and the bench that usually sits in our front of our window had been moved out of the way from the front of the house. I was embarrassed but relieved. The cops said they would make sure that there was a patrol in the area to keep an eye on things. For the next several nights, there was a police car rolling down my street right about the time my wife left to pick up her son, and then coming back at about a 15-minute interval from there on out. Problem solved, right? Not so much. After about 3 weeks, I figured the problem was resolved. There had been no more instances of window tapping or any other creepy activity around the apartment. It seemed like it had just been a weird, distressing prank, and that whoever it was over it. We were still making sure that we were cautious, keeping our deadbolt locked, walking the dogs at night together instead of alone, checking to make sure the cars were locked. But there was no reason to continue to really worry about it. So, that night, about 3 weeks later, I was working late. I had a lot of paperwork to do, and I just wanted to knock it out. So, at about 9 PM, I was still there. Everyone else in my building was gone, and had been gone for more than an hour now. It was just me. That was totally fine by me. I had locked myself in, set the security alarm, and turned off the unnecessary lights in the office. I wasn't worried, as I had done this many times before with no problems. I felt completely safe. I was also about 40 minutes from home. That was the length of my daily commute at the time. I'm not sure what time it was exactly, somewhere between 9 PM and 10 PM. I'm hanging out in my office, tapping away on my computer, my back to the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. They don't open and have blinds as well as curtains, but you can see the windows themselves from our front parking lot. At that point, I hardly noticed the windows. I had decorated them when I set up the office, put down the blinds, and promptly forgot about them. At least until I heard the tapping. It was the same sound, fingernails against glass. And this time it was directly behind me. Needless to say, I flipped a little. I almost turned over my desk chair, getting out of the office, and called the police from one of the interior offices with no windows. The entire time I'm waiting, which is about 10 minutes, I'm hearing this tapping. It wasn't in just one area, but moved around the windows on the front of our building, and it echoed in the empty halls, and was genuinely creepy as fuck. When the police arrived, they told me it was okay to come out, and I met them at the front door, which was still locked, and the security system still alarmed. They checked the perimeter of the building, the back door, the other offices, but there was no one there, just disturbed plants and dirt in the garden that runs along our building's front, and smudges on the glass. They waited while I locked back up, walked me to my car, and then followed me out of the parking lot until I hit the interstate. After that, everything seemed to stop. There have been no more instances of window tapping, either at home or at my office. Last week, for unrelated reasons, we moved to a new house much closer to my work, and in another city entirely. I've gone back to sometimes working late, but I also asked for my office to be moved to the back of the building, on the second floor, where my windows aren't accessible at all. So far, everything is quiet, and I'm hoping it stays that way. Window tapper, you creepy fuck, whoever you are, I hope we never meet.